Good evening, one and all. In today's session, we'll continue our discussion on SQL and how we can use Java to deal or interact with the database. So before that, one correction I want to make. So I've opened my SQL Server interface here, and I have to click on connect. And I've already created one file, so I'll click on Control plus O. That is, I'll open the previous file. Now we created the database, but we did not select that database. Okay, since I've already written some queries before, it selected that database. It did not select the JSPM database. So this SE students table is there now that got created inside the uh, this database, JDBC Programs database. Okay, so whenever you are going to create a database, you have to create it and then select it. How you'll select it? By saying use database name. Okay, so for now, though I created the JSPM database, this table has got saved in the this database, JDBC Programs database. So is it clear? So this table will be now in the JDBC Programs database and not in the JSPM database. So now I have opened this file. Do I need to create the database again? No. Okay, I'm going to say that I have to just select the database. You will create the database only once, and then next time if you open your server, that time you have to select the database. So creation of database will happen only once, and then whenever you open this interface, you have to simply select the database, and then you can work with it. Okay, so multiple times, no creating the database. So now I'm going to select this database because I have created by mistake the table inside this JDBC Programs database. And you might be seeing there are two minus signs over here or hyphens. They are nothing but the way to give the comments inside the SQL Management Studio. So if you remove those two lines, this will get uncommented. If you want to comment it, you must give two hyphens over here or two minus signs. So now this is uncommented. I have to select this database. So I'll select this and click on execute. So there is no error now. And then I will, do I need to create the table again? No, the table is already there. I have to only, if I want to read the content of the table, I will select all the columns or whichever columns and click on execute. Just a minute. Okay, I had not saved this yesterday. That is why I have to do it again now. I have to just simply the commands are here. I have to execute the commands, the queries again. I did not save it. That is why it was not coming. So now I created the database. Then how you'll select which database you want to work with by saying use database name. Okay, so this is database creation. This is database selection, and then create the table. I just now created it. Now I have to insert the records. And now when I select the data from the table, you'll get to see the records. Now suppose you want to select only the name and the age column. You don't want to select all the columns. That time you'll write select name, comma, age. You can also write age, comma, name, no problem. Means the order of the columns is not important. You, whichever columns you want, you can simply mention them here. And in this order only they'll be called. Means currently you can see in the table, name comes first and then the age column. But it is not important. You can write age column over here first and then name also. And whichever order you mention here, in that order, you will be able to see the table. So now I'll execute this command and you will be able to see only the name and age. Select name age from the table name. So you can see only the name and age uh, columns. This 1 and 2 that you can see, that is by default. Okay, I have not written that 1 and 2. That 1 and 2 is just for the row number. Okay, so you can select whichever columns you want. If I can say age comma name from the table name, then age and name will get selected. And if you want to select all the columns, this should work. Yeah. So this was which we have already seen yesterday. So we have to simply do one thing, that is we have to learn that how to use Java in order to extract the data from the database. So this is the program using which we'll access the database. So I told you yesterday that the database, everything is one part, and the logic to access the data is another part. Okay, so this is that part by which you can access the logic using Java. So whenever you want to write a program for JDBC, first of all, you have to connect to the whichever database management system you're using. Here I'm using SQL Server as the database management system, that is the DBMS. We have seen some examples of DBMS yesterday. Does anyone remember the types of DBMS or the names of the DBMS? You have seen MySQL, Oracle, DB2, FoxPro. Then we have seen different types of database: centralized, enterprise, decentralized, and all that. Okay, network model, hierarchical model. So here we are using the SQL Server as the DBMS, database management system. So you must write. This is the fixed way of writing it. This is the path or the link to the database management system. You must write JDBC colon SQL Server. If it is MySQL, then the this path will change. Instead of SQL Server, you can write MySQL over here. So this is SQL Server colon localhost. Localhost means if you have a client machine and a server machine, the client machine is the machine that you have, and the server is, or you can call it host also, host machine is somewhere else. It is usually not with you if you are interacting with other people's websites. Okay, so if you have the client machine, you have to request from your client machine to the host, that is the server. So I mean to say that if you have the client, you are the client, from your machine you have to make a request to the host, or you can call it the server, which is again a machine only. It's a computer itself. Server is nothing but a computer only, but a specialized one dedicated for handling the requests. So when you send your request from your machine to the host, this is a request, and this is a which you're sending. And from the host, what will come? From the host, you will get the response. So the host will send the response from itself, and it will send the response only if it has the resources which you're requesting. If whatever you're requesting, the host does not have it, or it is not capable of that request, then it will not send any response. It will send you an error, maybe 404 page not found error or something like that. So this, what you are sending is a request, what you're getting is a response. Now suppose this server is on your own machine, means what? The client machine and the server machine is the same. Then what will happen? From your own machine, you're going to request something. That means what? You have a machine which is acting as a client as well as a server. You have a single machine, that is your own laptop. It can act as a client whenever it is requesting something, and it can act as a server or a host whenever you are want to send the response. So your own machine will act as a client as well as a server. Means what? The resources that you're demanding or you want, whatever you want it is there on your own machine. Am I right? Because client and server is the same machine, means whatever the resources you want, they are located on your own machine only. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, so that is called as local host. Server or host is the same thing. So local host means what? Local means your own system, means in your own environment, local to yourself, you have the host. That is why it is called local host. Is it clear why we are writing local host over here? Because this DBMS that I'm showing you here is on my own laptop. That is why it acts as a local host for my system. Is it clear? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So this is 1433 is the port number. As I said, port is nothing but the place from which the processes are getting executed on your machine. So if you want to locate your machine, now this is actually some other topic that I want to discuss. You have a network. Inside the network, like Airtel network, Geo network, your internet service providers, they give you the network. Inside the network, you have multiple hosts. Host is nothing but multiple computers or clients, whatever. You have multiple hosts. So I'll write host only. Host can be any computer, or it can act as a client also, anything. And inside each host, you have multiple processes running. So if you know something about computer networks, to identify or locate or to understand which is the network, you need the IP address. To identify which is the host, in the IP address, to identify the network, you need the network part. In your IP address, you have two parts. One is the network part and one is the host part, or you can say network ID and host ID. So inside your IP address, you have two parts. The network part of the IP address is used to identify which is the network. And inside the network, which is the host, there are multiple hosts. To identify the host inside that same network, you'll use the host part of the IP address. And to identify inside the host which process you are referring to, you will use the port number. So IP address and port number is important to locate a process on any machine in the world, along with some other things like MAC address and all that. So that is why you need port number to identify the process. And the process can be anything. You're opening your Google Meet, your browser, or you're working on the IDE. That each thing is a process only because it is in the execution state. So to identify which process, you need the port number. So this is the process in which I'm requesting and some resources and all. So it is going through the 1433 port number. This is the port number. Is it clear why we need port number to identify the process? Is it clear? Yes.
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 And then the database name. Here I've written JDBC Programs because I have uh, used this database. I'm working in this database. Inside this database, I'm creating the tables. So that database name you have to give. And then integrated security equal to true. This is because you might be knowing about authentication, authorization. Okay, you want to validate whether the user is genuine or true or valid or not. Means here also when I opened the server, you would have seen this particular thing. And here it is saying authentication. So for this authentication, uh, this is Windows authentication, means without username and password, I want to authenticate because I know that my machine is with me only for now and no one else will access this database and all that. So instead of saving time every time entering username and password, I have said that Windows authentication means whatever account I have on my laptop, using that it will authenticate. But I can also write SQL Server authentication. Here I have to enter the login ID and password, and then I have to click on connect. So if you are using this SQL Server authentication, that is login ID and password you're using, in such cases, you don't have to write integrated security over here. In those cases, you will have to write the actual username and password. So you will have to write, instead of integrated security, you can write here user equal to whatever is the password and all, and then ID is equal to whatever. That also I'll show you an example. See here. Okay, it's not in this. I'll write it here and show you. You can write user equal to, within the quotes you can write whatever is the login ID or user ID, semicolon, password equal to, within quotes you can write what is the password. Okay, for now I don't have any username password, so I must use integrated security. Okay, so is the meaning of this path or URL clear?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm storing it as a string. As you can see, data type is string. Instead of URL, you can write anything, not necessary. It is just the name of the string. Then you have to do the connection. This is just I've specified the URL, but now you have to connect. Now there are inbuilt classes, predefined classes called as connection class, and connection con1 means con1 is an object of the connection class. Initially, I've initialized it to null, and then later on you can see here I'm going to call a method. Now you might be thinking that whenever we create an object, we we use the new keyword. But here what we are doing, we are writing the left hand side of the object creation, and then to that object we are going to assign a particular, we are going to call a particular static method called as getConnection. Okay, if you don't want to do it separately, what you can do is this con1 equal to driver manager, this thing you remove from here and you write it over here. So this is the left hand side, and in this object we are going to store some value which is going to be returned by this function. Okay, driver manager is a class and getConnection is a static method. We know that static methods are called using the class name. So driver manager is a predefined class. From that we are calling the static method, and to that static method I'm passing URL. URL is nothing but this thing that I explained. So why I'm writing it in two different places is because this connection establishment, it may happen or it may not happen. And if it does not happen, what it is an exception. It is a runtime error. That is why it is inside this try block. Okay, so always you must declare the objects over here, and then the object creation, the instantiation, and all that calling the methods is done in the try block. Because if the connection fails, if the URL is invalid, you'll come to know whether it is valid or not only after running your program. If it is invalid, you'll get error and the program will stop. We don't want that. We need to handle this exception. That is why inside the try block I've written it. So if there is any exception, it will be thrown to this catch block, and here I'll print the exception. Did you understand why this I'm creating the object, the calling the methods inside the try block?
Yes.
Okay, so you must also specify the driver, which driver you are using. We are using the, why we use driver, I have told you yesterday. Do you remember why do we use driver? Yes, driver acts as a translator so that Java and SQL can communicate, so that Java can extract the details of the database from SQL, and it, using Java you can also store the details inside the database using SQL. So they need to interact. That is why the server and this, whatever I've written, this is the actual translator called as driver. Okay, you must specify this if you are using the driver. As you can see, it is the driver given by Microsoft. That is by com.microsoft. It is a driver for the SQL server used for JDBC programs, and it is the SQL driver. Okay, so using this object con1, we are going to call a method to get the connection, to establish the connection. By what we have to connect? We have to connect the SQL server, and that connection we have to connect to the SQL server. That is why this path of SQL server we need, and that I'm putting here. Instead of putting it in URL and passing URL as a parameter, you can pass this whole string also over here instead of URL. Am I right? Yes, this whole string, I can directly write this whole thing instead of URL. What I'm doing, I'm storing the string inside URL, and then URL I'm writing over here. Instead of that, this whole string also I can paste here. Is it correct? Yes? Yes. Then you have another class called as statement, and this is fixed for all the JDBC programs. It will not change. There is another class whose object you have to create. You can call the object anything, but the class name is statement. And using this object, you are going to call a method of this object. Con1 is an object of connection class in which we are returning some value. And on this object, you have to call another method. And whatever is returned by this method, which you're calling on the con1 object, that will get stored to create the object of, it will get stored as the value returned to the statement object. Okay, so this is the actual flow that happens. First of all, you have to create the connection, and then on this object, you have to call something which will get stored in another object. Then on this object, you have to call again some method which will get stored in another object. Okay, so this has to be there for everything. So you are using three objects over here: connection class object, statement class object, and result set object. So first of all, connection class object, then statement class object, and then you'll go for the RS class object, result set object. I've called it as RS. Now comes the time of firing the query. So you will say statement, the previous object. On the previous object, you call a method, and whatever is returned, you store in the current object. Here also, on the previous object, you'll call some method and store the value in the current object. So I hope you're understanding. Is it clear?
Yes.
Yeah. So now if you want to execute the query, and if it is a select query, only if it is a select query, you must write execute query over here. And then whatever is the query, you must write in a string. That is select all from student. Now I'm using, I'll show you which table I'm using. So this is the database. In that database, I've already created a student table, which is this table. And this table I'm going to access now. Okay, so that table name is student. So select all from student. Now, if you don't want to write this string here, what you can do, you can write a, yes, can anyone tell me if I want to substitute this string by a variable name, what should I do? We have seen it in case of URL. Same thing we have to do for this query. Can anyone tell me what should I do?
Assign this statement as a string to a variable and call that variable there.
Yes, very correct. So you can say string query if you, or anything you can call this. The object name can be anything. String is a class actually. We call it data type also. And you can specify the query in the double quote. And then you can write your query. But sometimes to save time, you can directly write the query. Now, what this thing returns is, it will return all the rows and all the columns of the table. Why all the columns? Because this asterisk I've written. And we have not put any restriction on how many rows. That is why it selects all the rows. We know that for now, till now, we know that how to select the columns. Using star, we select all the columns. So all the columns will get returned inside this program from the database. Okay, mark my words. All the columns from the database come inside this program using this particular instruction. So all the columns, and we have not imposed any restriction on the rows, so all the rows also. And it will get stored, or it will be held by this RS object. Now, if we want to check that how many rows, or we can say that as long as the rows are available, okay, we must do some operation. So that is done by this object.next. If we want to check whether an integer is still available in the input, when we are giving input, we may give 5 integers. So as long as we are getting integers, we must accept them. So that time what we do, object.hasNext, right? That time we use object.hasNext. If you want to check whether it is an integer which is coming in our input. And if we want an integer, when we are accepting an integer and we are storing it, what we do, first of all, we create an object of the scanner class equal to new scanner system.in. And then what we do, whichever is our variable, suppose a, we write next int right? This is the way that we do it. Now it is giving me an error. Can you tell me why? This particular scanner is giving me an error. Why?
sc.nextInt.
Okay, very good. Another error. One more error is there.
Import statement maybe.
Yes, correct. Very good. Okay, you need to import. What we need to import? Do you remember?
util.style.
Java.util.scanner.
Yes, very good. So error has gone. So we use next int. Why? We want an integer as the next input. If we want a string, what we use? We simply write next. So all that is returned from the database, you can understand that it is a string only because we are using next over here. Right? This next is used to accept the strings one by one. So while we are accepting strings, we have to do something. Is it clear why next we are using here? Yes? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay, so as long as we are accepting, RS holds what? What does RS hold? I just now said it. It holds the entire database because we are selecting all the columns and all the rows. I mean, it holds the entire table. Which table? The student table. It holds the entire table. And in this RS, if you want the first column, then you must say dot get string 1. 1 stands for column 1. So the order in which you are seeing the data here, it is at position 1, you have the roll number column. So that roll number column, which has come as a string and has got stored inside RS object. That roll number column has come as a string and got stored inside RS object. So we are using the getString method. We have to convert that into a string. Okay, this getString method is used in order to get a string from this object. Whatever the column we have got, it has been stored as a string inside this RS object. And now we have to get the first column. So get string 1. We are going to get the string which is stored inside RS object. That is by get string. And which is that string? It is actually the column 1. So the entire column 1. What is the column 1? Column 1 will be consisting of 500, 501, 502, 503, as you can see here. Similarly, for column 2, what will I have to write to extract the column 2? Any idea? For column 1, what we do? We write 1. So for column 2, what we'll write?
2.
Exactly. Same thing. And I'm concatenating. You know this. Strings can be concatenated. So 2, then similarly 3 and 4. We have 4 columns. So again, if you write here, if you write 5 also, get string 5 if you write, then it is an error. It's an exception. That is why it is inside the try block. So exception will get occurred. So did you understand how we are extracting the columns from the database, from the table in the database? Is it clear?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you tell what is that rs.next doing? What will it do?
It is going to accept the input, and the input will be each column of the table. Means here what we do, we are accepting the integer inputs one by one. If I write next int, we are accepting the integers. We are going to accept integers. So next, why we use if we want to accept strings. So if I write string a equal to next, then what will happen? The strings will keep on coming and getting stored in a variable. Means whichever string. If you write this once, then one string will get stored in a. If you want to repeat the same thing in another string b, you will again accept the input. If you want another string, what you'll do? You'll do the same thing inside C variable. Again, you'll say next int. So what will happen? The next string will come and get stored in C. So as you can see, string 1, then string 2, then string 3. This is a repetitive process. So why not put it inside a while loop? So while we are getting the input, we are going to print it. That is the meaning. Is it clear now? Yes. See, we are calling this next function, this method, again and again. Instead of doing that, I've put it inside this loop. Is it clear? Yes. Are you there?
Yes, sir, it is clear.
So now let me run this program, and what you'll get to see is all the columns and all the rows. Wait for some time. Should have been running by now. Student JDBC program, select all from student. And connection, get URL, select all. As you can see, it's running, means it's not stopping, it's still running only. Get the string from rs. Oh, it is waiting for this next, right? Here it is expecting an input because it written as next over here. This is our normal program in which we are accepting things, right? So here it is waiting for me to enter a string or an integer. So if I enter some integers, after that the table data will get displayed. Okay. So I have to comment this out. Okay, that was the issue. So I'll rerun it without that next thing. And now you can see the table details have come. So what has come in that row? First entry was 500 Joel 21 Pune, as you can see. The next is 501 Sam, 501 Sam, then Bob Raj. Okay, same entries. Pune, Pune, Delhi, Pune, 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 Delhi, Pune. So is it clear? Yes. Is this clear?
Yes.
And all this syntax and all this objects creation and all that will remain same for each and every JDBC program. Now, let me know one thing. If I'm having a database whose name is JSPM, then what changes I have to make in the URL? Where should I make the change?
Database name.
Yes, here I have to write JSPM. And if the table name is SE students, then in the query, what change I should make? This is the query.
Student.
Yeah, there should be SE students. So depending on your database and your table, you must make those changes. And whenever it is a select query, that time the method that you call here, in this method you're passing the query. This method is called as, the name of the method is executeQuery. So first of all, you need 3 classes. You have to create their 3 objects. One class is used to establish the connection, that is con1. That object, you will first of all establish the connection. Then you'll call a method on that and store it in next object. Then you'll call another method and you'll store it in the next object. And then using this rs, while the rows exist, that time you can print this rs.getString and whichever columns you want. You can print column 1 and 2, then only 1 and 2 will come. 3 and 4 will not come over here. Suppose I remove this while loop. Let us see what happens. So it is saying that the result set means what? The rs object. Why it is saying result set? Because rs is an object of the result set class. So it is saying the result set has no current row. That means you have to, you can consider that rs is your source from which you're getting the input. Like how from your console, if you want some data, then what do? If you want to input an integer 12, then here you type 12 and then you click enter. So that 12 from this console window, from here that 12 will go inside your program. Instead of that, from your rs you are accepting the input, not from your console. That is why from rs you're saying dot next. If it is from your console window, then scanner object dot next. But if rs is your source of input, rs dot next. Now is it clear? Yes. And then so you need this while loop. As long as rows are existing, you must print it. That is the meaning. Okay, and this will remain same whenever you are using select query. And if there is any error, if the URL is wrong or anything, it will go inside this catch block and exception will get raised. Okay, so I've showed you how Java can be used as a backend language to interact with the database using SQL. Java on its own cannot access. Why I'm saying that? Because we actually need to write the SQL queries and then pass them to a method in Java. Okay. So any doubts up till here? Okay, now the next topic